Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Tim Longo, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, as the chosen avatar, just wishes he could cut a break and just retire.
Oh, Brett Duville. I do. I wish I could just retire.
That had a dual meaning, both for you as well as I always thought it was funny with the Ultima series that the Avatar just can't seem to catch a break. Like
it is the cut rate Narnia of the 80s and 90s that he has to go back again and again, or she actually,
or she, yeah, your choice, yeah, in most cases,
and not a and there's no difference in play also for being male or female in this game.
Yeah,
which is something we'll talk about, but yeah, it's a thing. I mean, we're talking about Ultima Underworld. We're starting a new series tonight, and it's funny. This is a game that I just took a look at and didn't really get into when I started at LucasArts, and now I'm totally and thoroughly hooked.
Interesting.
I was, and I think part of it was pacing and interface issues, which we'll certainly get into, I'm sure. Just why I bounced off. And it wasn't even so much that I bounced off it. I just had a lot going on, and I wanted to be aware of it, and I played a little bit. I was like, okay, I see what that is, I guess. And then just kind of put it aside. Like, oh, it's kind of a slower-paced Wolfenstein or Doom with melee instead of ranged weaponry, although there's some ranged weaponry. And I don't think I played long enough to let it sink its teeth into me at all. I think I played just enough to kind of to get the sense of, oh, it's a first-person game. Okay, we have those now. What's with this small window? Oh, you have to do all this clicking. Okay, well, there's others that are probably better as far as this goes, right? And I think I just sort of was like, okay, well, failed experiment. Having no real sense, but always wanted to come back to it as one of the. I mean, I have a CD-ROM downstairs with both Ultima Underworlds, but I will say I played the first level for probably 3.5, close to 4 hours on the stream. I had a number of people who said, "Wow, this interface looks really tough," and I tried this and I bounced off of it this past week or whatever, but as the stream went on, it was more like, oh wow, I see how you could get really into this, as sort of the immersive sim stuff got its hooks in, and now I'm playing this, and I've also played a couple of hours of Ultima Underworld 2 because I wanted some more.
Interesting.
So that's where I am right now with the immersive sim. But before we go into all that, I guess we should talk. Let's start setting it up a little bit because it's our first episode. We should talk about when this happens.
Yeah. So this game was released by Origin Systems, eventually acquired by EA, and of course, Origin was responsible for all the Ultima games. It's credited as directed by Richard Garriott, who is of course Lord British. For those who hopefully know but maybe don't know, took on a pseudonym for his game development exploits.
Yeah, more of a. It's not even really a pseudonym. It's more of a
title.
Another identity.
A weird, the cosplay title.
Personality, yeah.
So this was March of 1992 that it came out, and there were other games that we've talked a little bit about here and there that came out before this game that influenced it to some degree. We've talked about Wizardry and Dungeon Master was a particular game that I remember from my past as well as a kid. So there are a few, and of course the Gold Box games to some degree, and
especially Eye of the Beholder,
yeah, Bard's Tale, and so you could see the lineage. But this one in particular, I believe is really credited to be kind of the fork in the road for truly bringing a bunch of elements together for the first time. I know it was mind-blowing to me when I played it, because I bought it in 92 around that time and played it. And this was another similar to my Brett knows about my exploits with Dark Corners of the Earth, which kind of took me off and on ultimately like 10 years to finish that game. And this was a similar game for me because I never finished it as a kid, and then I would come back to it from time and time again and restart it ever since 1992. So, but yeah, it did well. Wikipedia credits it with 500,000 units, which in that day and age was
that era
quite
is pretty good.
Yeah. And then had major influences on a lot of the series that we love today, including Elder Scrolls and a lot of the immersive sims, and became the lineage ultimately for a lot of the Looking Glass stuff. A lot of the people here went on to work at Looking Glass and found Looking Glass. Warren Spector was a producer on this game as well. That's what he's credited on, but we know kind of in this era, everyone was sort of a designer to some degree. Doug Church was on this game as a programmer and then later directed System Shock, as we've talked about, I think, in the original series that we played for System Shock 2, etc. So, big influences. And then in 92...
Yeah, another person to mention out of the credits, and he's, I believe, a programmer then on Ultima Underworld 2, is... Marc, a.k.a. MAHK LeBlanc.
Right.
And also, I think Tim Stelmach is another name who comes up again and again in the immersive sim genre. And I think he takes a bigger role in the second one as well. But these are... Marc LeBlanc is like a generalist programmer, is very similar to me in that respect. And went on to be, I believe, at Looking Glass with these folks, and was in the industry for quite a while. I don't know what he's up to these days, actually. I should try to find that out. But I saw his name in the credits as well, and I thought that was worth pointing out.
Yeah, and something that we'll eventually get to is Deus Ex, which, of course, Warren Spector's game. And then Harvey Smith and Randy Smith came from that same group, and then now, of course... what's the game that Harvey just shipped the sequel to? That's name's
Prey?
Escaping me. No, Prey was
Dishonored 2.
Dishonored 2, yeah, the Dishonored series and such. But then of course Paul Neurath. I'm not sure how to pronounce.
Yeah, I think Neurath.
Yeah, and so
that's right. Yeah,
he was one of the original Looking Glass folks, and then now they're working on with Warren Spector, who's come back with him on Underworld Ascendant, as Brett mentioned in pre-show, which is sort of a spiritual successor to this game, yes, with other side entertainment.
One that I'm now waiting for with bated breath because.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can't wait to get into this. So let me talk about some of the games that were of this era that I had forgotten, and it's very interesting to me to see some of these on the list for 92. We have Dune II, which we talked about during our Warcraft series, right? Being sort of the original real-time strategy game. You have Ultima, VII, Blackgate.
Right, 7. Which was the origin game I was playing this year.
Yeah.
I played 6 and 7 quite a lot. So I know we finished 7. A buddy of mine just went on one of those crazy 72-hour benders of playing games, going back and forth to the PC. So that's what I was playing instead of this back in 92.
Well, and 7 is cited as a lot of people's favorite of the series too.
I think it's the pinnacle of the series because 8 tries some experimental things and 9 goes... leaves the house without its pants, let's just say. So.
But Wolfenstein 3D, just a little game with a bit of influence on the industry. Indiana Jones: Fate of Atlantis, I wanted to mention because it's close to us, and Hal Barwood's sort of big success in the adventure game series. Ecco the Dolphin, Super Mario Kart, which is crazy to think. The other one I wanted, Mortal Kombat. That was for Night Trap. But the other one I wanted to mention was Alone in the Dark, actually, which we talked about during Resident Evil. Really is kind of the first survival horror game to be technical about it. 3D, polygonal, fixed camera, and etc. So quite a few notable.
Yeah, one other one I'd even mention that year is Flashback, which I played on the Sega, not on the Amiga, which is what is listed here as its release. But that was a fantastic game, sort of in the vein of Another World or Out of This World, sort of adventure game. Really lovely game, especially for the time. Its animation was really fantastic. I think that's the first time I ever noticed there being a warning too about potential epilepsy effects from video games, because it literally had at the beginning some crazy flashing sequence, and I think they actually had an in-game warning to be careful.
Oh wow!
For this one, may have been in the manual, but it stuck out as like, oh, I've never seen that before. So, yeah, interesting. Definitely an interesting year.
Yeah, and the interesting thing when you look, for me, kind of going back down memory lane for a little bit on all the other games that came out in this time, and a lot of them were kind of the quote unquote firsts of their kind, or in some cases, like I'd say Indiana Jones and Fate of Atlantis is kind of one of the pinnacle of that genre. And to see that this game was in that same year, because it really, it was mind blowing for me as a kid, or whatever, however old I was at that point, 20-year-old. That's just basically, I was an idiot kid at the time. And I couldn't believe, and I want, we'll talk about it throughout the series, all the things that it was attempting to do. And having played, I wasn't too big into Wolfenstein 3D specifically. It wasn't kind of, I could appreciate it, but it wasn't my thing. But I was a big RPG player. And I was, as I've said before, I was a big Eye of the Beholder fan, but it just so limited that I love the first person view, but you could see, and Bard's Tale as well, you could see where the walls were, not the literal walls, but, the walls of the design really were. And what they ended up trying to do with this game was just flabbergasting that they even attempted it, And as we started playing it for this session, all of it just came flooding back to me, and I just couldn't believe the stuff that they were putting together in this design and actually succeeding. No argument here. I am kind of astonished by how much is here. I mean, it's you definitely see. Okay, so this is. I'm trying to think of what first-person antecedents. I mean, it really has to be the RPGs. I think probably they were saying, let's try this thing. And I want to say too that this was a time at which they were branching out a little bit more with Ultima, and this ties in more with the second Ultima Underworld game. But they had kind of come up with this lore where the Avatar comes from another universe, which is basically our own, right? We leave our universe and go into the world of Ultima, of Britannia, to save the world once again every time. That I don't think had always been very clear, but by 4, I think even that was sort of the mythology of the series. It was that the Avatar comes from our universe to go into theirs. And they were branching out to use Ultima in different ways. There were a couple off-brand using the Ultima VII engine games that I think they were Ultima VII engine games. They may have been 6. I think there were 7 called Ultima Adventures that were set in sort of pulp locations, pulp science fiction in Martian Dreams, and pulp Land of the Lost sort of thing in Savage Empire, both of which I own and played quite a bit. They may have been a little bit after this, but this was the time when they were starting to branch out and experiment with those sorts of things. I don't think all of those were as financially successful as this one was, but they could hope, I guess. I think in particular the Worlds of Adventure, Ultima Worlds of Adventure, were probably less successful just because they were so sort of strange in conception, and had a hard selling proposition, I think, at the time, for people who were used to, I want either my science fiction or I want my fantasy, but not this like weird thing that was going on with those. I mean, it was some early good examples of taking an IP or a brand recognition and trying to stretch it, It's an interesting concept. I don't think I finished either of those, but I remember buying them and being excited by them, but they weren't really achieving the goal that that the other quote unquote Ultima games were doing in that series. And I think I've said this before too, and that's why kind of the Bard's Tales and the Eye of the Beholders, for some reason, I always gravitated toward the first person RPGs. And though I played the Gold Box games and I played some of the early Ultimas, when I don't remember how that came to pass. Maybe it was Dungeon Master being the main one or something that really got me on there. But this was sort of, for me, this was the game that I had always hoped that for them to be, because I think when it comes to richness of systems and interactions, the 2D ones had quite a bit, the Ultimas especially. So the ideas were all there. It was just presented in a way that, for me as a gamer at the time before I was in the industry, it just wasn't as interesting. I wanted the immersion. And then this one, combining the immersion of the actual, point of view, as well as the simulation aspect of it, was just mind blowing. And it just, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. It just again came rushing back to me when literally, and I had forgotten about all this, but literally when the opening credits started and I heard the music, I had a weird combination of cold sweats and just giddy excitement all over again, because it took me so many years to finish this game, but also just the excitement of it, and it just came rushing back. But what were you going to say?
I was going to say I never played... I didn't play a lot of the first-person ones. I played some Bard's Tale. I played a lot of Wizardry actually back in the day. The first Wizardry, but Ultima actually was my bread and butter. But always the top down, the top down ones that are the main series until 9, and even 8 has some weird stuff in it too, as I recall. Some side-scrollery type stuff, I want to say, with platforming. It's kind of weird. But yes, so I actually, the Gold Box were right in my wheelhouse as well. But I don't think I played very much of Eye of the Beholder. I know I have it somewhere down in the basement, but and probably in my GOG account now, but I didn't play tons of first-person ones. And so I did play some Wolfenstein 3D. Of course, that came out after this, and I didn't play it, I don't think, in that year. I may have played it the next year. And then Doom, of course, is where I kind of got into first-person really whole hog. And
I think it's the RPG aspect of it that merged. And that's why it was flabbergasting to me to see the list of 1992, to see Wolfenstein on the same year. Because then you have these two different companies that are coming at a similar problem, from different ways. And Wolfenstein's always very much credited as the first person shooter, of course, and the first big first person game in general that really broke out, but I forgot that this was the same year. And so they were, influencing. As I'm reading up a little bit about sort of some of the development, it sounds like maybe some of the Origin Systems stuff that they were doing with maybe one of their space sims was an influence for the engine and stuff. So some kind of roundabout ways to get to what they were trying to do with 3D, 3D view and stuff.
I wonder if that would have been Wing Commander, you mean? Or
no, it's
because I think that's
Space
later,
Rogue
right?
was the name of it, wow. And I don't think it came, and maybe it didn't come out, or no, that came out, yeah. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting. You always think that id kind of owned the space of creating those engines and kind of influencing everyone's approach, at least from my kind of non-programmer head. But they're, they weren't alone, and this is coming out in the same year, doing so many other systemic and simulated things at the same time. Just, crazy.
And of course, I mean, here there is definitely the significant difference in pacing from an id game, and of course it's not a full screen renderer, which also has some benefits. Obviously, you're not drawing as much, so they're basically taking. I mean, there had been first person sections in even the first and I think the second Ultima, where you go down into dungeons.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and it's vector graphics, so it's all line art. It's just line drawing of the 3D space.
Yeah,
but it is convincing in 1981 or whatever that it came out, or 1980 maybe the first one. Probably should have looked that up, but it's very early 80s and pretty amazing when I played it back on my Apple II. So that there is sort of a heritage here of that. There you used about 1 billion keys on the keyboard, and the screen was almost all rendering. There was a little text box. It is actually quite similar to the presentation here, but without texture mapping and with sort of similar presentation as far as, I guess, all your hit information, like the fact you've been hit. Maybe they shake the camera. Ooh, it's been a while. I'd have to go back and look. But I think the ideas were there.
Yeah.
And you can sort of imagine Lord British going, boy, it'd be really neat if you could really feel like you were there. More than we're able to with this sort of top-down God view of the world.
Well, and then yeah, again, like Eye of the Beholder for me, Stone Keep was another one that I wanted to mention too that you may not have heard of, but that was a...
Oh, I've heard of it. I've never played it.
Yeah, that was a kind of a Eye of the Beholder, kind of rip-off, but higher fidelity. But, and then the other, on the JRPG side, I never, as I've said, I've never got into the Final Fantasy games, but I did play Dragon Warrior back in the day that eventually became the Dragon Quest franchise. And they had the first person kind of Eye of the Beholder style dungeons as well. And I always loved those games for that. You have to get your grid paper out, your grid paper out and map it all out, for yourself, that kind of, on that side. But yeah, and I was looking at, there's Ogre, let's see, a few others from this group that might have influenced it to get them to this. But I think the thing, being on the grid for those previous games, you always, like I said before, you could always feel the developer there, and as soon as, and then the other thing that, as I think we'll get into probably pretty shortly, the exploration of controls. And so, okay, now we're in this first person view. And of course, Wolfenstein had its way of solving that with arrow keys at the time.
One verb.
Yeah, shooting and arrow keys, but here, yeah, good point. There, multiple verbs happening, but also just this free look concept, right? And so mouse look wasn't a thing yet. People didn't know how to deal with this sort of control interface. And as anyone who's playing along with us or maybe watched Brett's stream, they're early, as with any system like that, especially controls, it's always cumbersome up front, until we figure it out. And this is no different. I mean, the over-designed weird, like, hindsight 2020 when we look now what mouse look can do, but you look at it now and you're just like, man, this is overdone with if you try to just use the mouse. One thing
the game does not work as a mouse game at all, even though it encourages that. I think I quickly dropped into what for me was way more comfortable is just using a keyboard for moving and turning, and even pitching up and down the 1 and 3 with 2 to center your view to pitch up and down, were everything I really needed. And I totally dropped into that as soon as I spent a little time trying to control the mouse. I was like, that is not gonna work. Boy, this is gonna be a long game if it's this. Yeah. And I quickly switched to I popped onto WASD. I was like, oh, wait a minute, W and S both move me forward. What's going on? And I kind of worked out, because I was doing this on the stream. I actually hadn't read the manual yet, and it's kind of hard to read the manual while you're streaming, because it's also digital. So I'd have to close the window or tab away or whatever. And so I fell back into how I played first person shooters for a long time. I played through Quake. I played with entirely the keyboard, no mouse at all. So it was actually totally comfortable for me to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing I will say that is an interesting, I think, full circle for games in general with now the embracing of controllers and analog sticks is you can see the sort of thought process with using the mouse exclusively because you get analog control. Like there is momentum and speed with the way that I wanted to ask you about physics in this game and how they're handling that, because it seems crazy that there's even anything like that. But you know, if you're using the mouse and you have analog control over how fast you're going to run, which will dictate, and you can do that with the keyboard, of course, too, but it's kind of on or off, right? It's digital. So there's an interesting experimentation there that we eventually come back around to with controller and analog sticks, where you can fine tune your movement, right? Where you can walk and then run on the same stick and have more control over that.
Right.
But
yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, that's definitely a whole thing. I do remember actually the thing that put me off. I don't feel like mouse look was really an option with Wolfenstein. I may be wrong about that.
No, it wasn't until
it wasn't until Doom, right? Or even
I think
Doom
it was
2?
Doom 2, actually. We definitely looked that up.
Yeah.
Doom 2 was first.
But I tried it with Doom 2, and the problem was that moving the mouse side to side, I feel like it would move you forward as well as doing look. So it wasn't look only. It was some weird amalgam of, and that's what put me off. I was like, this will never catch on because it was so strange. Yeah. And I almost feel like this is in a way preferable because it's very clear about what it's doing. Right. With the iconography on the screen. It's still not as comfortable as just using the keyboard.
No,
but
no, and I'm using keyboard too. I just wanted to make the point of that sort of like that early idea of analog movement and where the instinct was probably right. You know, it just was the wrong implementation. Ahead of its time kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it took a while, and it's also, you know, depending on your frame rate, you're not pulling the mouse all that quickly. You may find that analog movement doesn't translate really well. It might be not super consistent. And mice were fairly new and a little bit janky even.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they were all mechanical and not optical as they mostly are today.
That's right.
You can still buy like a trackball or something like that is going to be, but even there it's going to be that's more mechanical, I guess I was going to say. But even there, the technology is so much further along. Just the engineering to build the things is so much better that it's not going to be a bad experience. But with a mouse back then, you get some dust in there. I mean, every now and again, you'd have to pop the thing open and take the ball out and clean off the little metal rollers that controlled its motion, or read its motion, I should say. And so it was a really kind of a messy device to use, period. I mean, I'm still not a mouse user to this day because, well, for one thing, it's not good for carpal tunnel, as we know, but I just naturally gravitate towards doing as much as I possibly can with the keyboard, and learning any keyboard shortcuts I need to in order to achieve that goal. Whereas I love a controller. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of this interesting innovations, and then and mouse and keyboard, there are wonderful things. And I'm primarily a PC player, as I think I've said, but there's wonderful things about it. But I do feel like sometimes for gaming, it's sort of tradition or something that's kept it going, you know, to some degree. Even though mouse look is definitely superior for aiming certain things, but it's just funny to see this lineage for this particular thing, you know. So it's interesting. I want to hear more about your early moments and kind of the not being able to watch your stream. Like what was the process for you coming to that kind of that revelation of having it kind of sink its claws into you? Like what were some moments that you were like,
so I watched the intro. Yeah, I watched
hilarious.
The intro with the stream. Which is it's pretty funny. And it's like, what? I'm like this great hero. What the heck? You think I just stole your daughter? Come on. Anyway, you get thrown by, I don't even remember his name. And actually, I'm amused by how these things are pronounced as well. But it's the Stygian Abyss.
The Abyss was in the earlier games as a dungeon, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So you're being sent into sort of one of the Ultima dungeons. Anyway, so I watched that, and then you're in there, and you get that great final shot of like the door closing and you in the light. I created my character.
What'd you make?
My character was the delightful female, and because I was on stream, I had a voice vote, and people wanted me to play the bard.
No,
so I'm playing the bard.
Too predictable.
Right. I was gonna play a druid. I was gonna play something different. But they were like, no, you have to play the bard. You're the bard guy. So I played. I made a female bard named Trish.
Okay.
Because the last of the portraits is like the most 80s looking, like late 80s, early 90s looking woman that they have. They have some interesting portraits, and one of them is like this woman who looks like she's the roommate in Terminator, with like this ribbon around her hair and like an earring. Oh, it's so it's so exactly that. So anyway, I named her Trish. So Trish and I as Trish now are there, and basically I was trying to figure out how to pick up the things that are nearby. I'm like, that looks like a sack. I should try to pick that up and see if there's anything in it that I need, and boy do you ever. So so I was moving around a bit. I couldn't figure out how to pick things up. Somebody in the stream pointed out, oh hey, you can use the right mouse button to click and drag, which is actually a pretty decent innovation for the
So I wanted to ask you about that specifically, because taking an object from the world and then dragging it into your inventory, isn't that kind of mind-blowing?
It is pretty mind-blowing. I mean, technically speaking, they are just using the same... It's just the same icon. It's the same graphics.
No,
right?
yeah.
It's just at different resolutions because of perspective in the world and all that stuff. So you basically just click and drag, and it's just a bit of graphics, and they just make it fit in a smaller. Right, they're putting it as an icon basically as soon as you can put it into 2D. It's always 2D and facing the camera or whatever in the world, but yeah, it's a great moment where you're like, oh, I can just pick it and move it over here. Wow. It's a pretty neat thing. I mean, definitely don't quote me saying that this would be the first time that's happened in games, but it was surprising to me. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. I was trying to figure out how to, like, which of these icons will, like, there's a get button, and I'm like, well, I must have to click this and then hit it, and it's going to show up in my inventory. And somebody on the stream pointed out, oh no, I read you can right click and
drag,
and drag, and I was like, really? And I pulled it over, and sure enough, I was like, oh, that's really cool.
And then not only that, but it's a bag. So there's some concept of contents,
containers,
and then later on I'll tell you my hoarding story in this game.
Oh boy. I can hardly wait. So I pretty much tried to stay a little bit organized. Like, oh, this is my food bag, and this is my whatever. It's so great. I always have the map out in the main inventory because I always want to look at the map.
It's so flexible though. Like you can both.
You can do it however you want.
Totally mess yourself up.
It is it's the Trello of inventory systems. Just lists of lists. Although you can. So one of the things I noticed in Ultima Underworld 2 is that you can keep adding stuff to bags, and this may also be true of Ultima Underworld. I only discovered it after I'd finished playing my Ultima Underworld session. But in 2, I added too many things to a bag, and it just kept adding them. You just can't see them. So there's like 8 slots or whatever, and you can only see those 8 slots, but the other things go into the bag. And if you remove things from the bag, ultimately they show up again because they're further down the list. So as you pull things out,
I've forgotten.
I don't know if that's true of the first one or not. And
that sounds like a UI nightmare or a UX nightmare, though.
Yes. I
where's
was
that
like,
key?
where did that go? I'm like, oh no, it's gone. I can't get it back. There's a bug. And then I dragged the thing out. I was like, oh no, there it is. Yeah. And so now in my food bag, I know it's all food in there, so I just add whatever food into it. And if it doesn't show on the first screen, that's fine. But yeah, I thought that was, it's pretty neat. I mean, I was a little worried to move out of that area because I felt like I'm really missing something important here and I don't know how to do it. And I'm like, but here I am, I'm streaming. Thank goodness for whoever it was who mentioned that. And I'm sorry I didn't write down your name, but I appreciated it. And so then I just started moving around, and one of the things that I really appreciated about the level design in the first level is that it feels totally open and free, but there are locked doors that you can't go through. And it feels like you should be able to, but you actually have to go to a place where you talk to a person before you can, before you'll be able to find the people with the key. Mm. So you have to talk to this man named Braggett, I guess?
Yeah, there's some... I mean, that was just as a quick note, like, the other thing about it is this sort of merging of different concepts that have been in other games, but in kind of a seamless way. So to your point, you can go talk to people, and there's a dialogue box that comes up, and their portraits there, and they, you know what I mean? And there's this kind of persistence to them even because they're walking around, and if you open a door, they'll walk out the door, and
yes, they will
kind of get lost sometimes, and who knows where they're going. You know what I mean? It's just these sort of like it's kind of a convergence game in that there's these different concepts that I've appreciated in other games finally being put into one place. And then we'll get into a lot more of this stuff as we play.
I think it starts as more of a game with a top-down design in the sense of let's try to make this as real a place as we can, and what mechanics have to support that, rather than here's some interesting mechanics we'd like to put together, and kind of building up to whatever that game, what makes that, or what those mechanics make as a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's more of a blueprint.
Right. It's a very top down. Like, we will include things that aid immersion, but we will not include things that don't. And so they're trying to find ways that use their limited verbs, because there's still quite a fair amount of. We've talked before with RPGs about how there's a difference in them between player skill and sort of abstracted character skill. And a lot of that is on display here as well. But you are doing that in a world that feels responsive, and of course the combat itself is real time, so that's a difference as well from something like Planescape Torment with its sort of pause play combat.
Not only that, but I mean gesture based. You know, I mean it's real time, and it's location and gesture based in a time. It's just craziness that, and we've talked about this on various series that we've played, just this concept of this era, these sort of few decades when I just felt like it was very much a time of we have an idea, we'll implement the idea, you know, versus like there were, I don't know if it's, I know I'm being reductive by saying this, but there just were fewer barriers in the way, you know what I mean, to getting an idea there because on screen, and that's at least my perception, right? And
I think that's true. It's because teams are small. I mean, you look at the credits for this game. I had them here, and you've got 5 programmers, no level designers. So you've got
the level design wasn't really a thing.
It wasn't really a thing yet, and so they're basically probably going from graph paper to design to area to implementation, and who knows what their editing tools look like. I kind of shudder to think. But 2 artists, a music / sound programmer, which would have been a thing still at the time because the Sound Blaster was still coming. I think it hadn't quite made it here yet. Yeah.
The sounds are,
the sounds are actually mostly DOS and MIDI and stuff. But I mean, that's complicated stuff to do to the level that they do it here. And then you have some musicians and sound, and then basically a lot of support folks. So you're talking about a team of 10 or under, maybe. That's pretty small and cheap in 1991 or 92 or whatever. And you're trying to get games out in like a year or maybe a year and a half for something ambitious like this, as opposed to 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
Like some of the titles I worked on, in the not too distant past. So there's just a big difference there. When you're talking about that, you can probably, especially with a lot of Ultima money behind you, because it was a popular series, you could probably take more risks as well, and maybe be okay with, all right, well, maybe this doesn't work out and it fails and we kind of push it out. And I think that also led to kind of a dark side in the industry, where you never knew what the quality of a game was going to be.
Yeah.
Coming on the PC, you might be sold by the box art and get it home and it barely runs, or has significant crash bugs, or what have you. And because they could push something out, and you really only had a hobbyist press, and you still really only have a hobbyist press, but it was hard to get
unpredictable
information, and it was really, really hard to know. And I do think Origin games were games that did stand for quality. So you could really go based on this particular team, I think.
Ultima as well, right? That was pretty
right, and Ultima as well. Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of the? So another example for me that I remember kind of being a revelation at the time was kind of going back to the drag and drop, but using a key on a door, kind of in a very literal way. And I was looking at my notes, and I also had verbs down here as well. And kind of this the note was verbs in adventure games, just to kind of jog my memory to mention it. And kind of this concept that wasn't, a lot of the verbs are not unlike adventure games, and some RPGs as well, but implemented in such a, again, first person way. But the combination of some of those verbs together just were just crazy to me, that they were all happening in one space. And then again,
it is kind of a Scum-like presentation.
Yeah,
that you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I meant. That this sort of like clarity of what your verbs are, kind of, especially with the interface, right? Because you have those icons to the side and stuff. You kind of know
see them right there.
Yeah, and then this kind of concept of dragging and dropping, and I forget when that came into the Scum games, if that had already happened or was still to come, or I guess that was always in them. Was it always the way back?
No, the buttons were always in there, and basically, I think when you'd mouse over them or click them, it would say what the verb was.
Yeah, you'd make sentences out of
sort of a parser in the bottom.
Yeah, but
even though it wasn't parsed in that way.
But then the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because for full disclosure, I didn't, because I was away. I didn't get to finish this session, so I'm about probably halfway through the first floor. But I did, the concept of ecosystem, even just on the first floor, and this meeting the goblins and crossing the river and falling in the river and and swimming forever. It's just the concept of swimming, and having that all be, and then finding the way out, and just, but just this concept of an ecosystem, where you meet NPCs who are telling you about the world, and then you go and you experience, there are the goblins, and they're the ones that they talked about. Like where did the 3 hours go for you? 3 or 4 hours?
I scoured this whole map, so I think I've uncovered basically everything. I do have one door I haven't been able to open. I don't know if I have to pick the lock or if, which I'm not sure I can do.
It's terrifying. Missing something in this game or dropping something, like that's one of my nightmares of life, is Ultima Underworld. And
I know. Well, let me tell you, Fallout 2, the second time I tried to get through that game, I dropped something that I needed to get into some major town.
Yeah.
I had no idea where, and that was the end of that playthrough.
Yeah.
So it's very, very similar in that way. But here I got a sense pretty quickly of what was valuable and what wasn't. But I went everywhere, and I traipsed all the way back to the shrine and leveled up a couple different times, and I do have a real I do find the jumping very difficult. Very hard to control. There's no air steering, obviously, because that wouldn't be real, I guess. So it makes it difficult to make some of the jumps, and you sort of have to learn. That is basically a player skill of figuring out how far you can jump and whether you should be walking or running when you try to make a jump. Because you will jump and you'll hit the wall above a door or above a ledge, and it will stop you, and you will fall down to the water or whatever below. Hopefully it's water. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was that I just spent a ton of time going around. One thing I wondered about is, did you find the green and the gray goblins? The two different. There's basically three groups on this level.
Yeah, I started. Yeah, that's about where I stopped. I started interacting with them and the whole, and then the NPCs, the human NPCs, talk about the two different groups and stuff. But
right,
but the whole
and you can talk to the goblins as well.
Oh man, the whole concept of factions. Also a mind-blowing concept. We'll talk a lot more about that as we go.
Oh, I'm sure we will. Yes, it seems like it's a real underpinning of the whole thing, because there's these civilizations that have kind of been thrown into disarray with the death of some important person, Sir Cabarrus, or
there's a history to this. Like, they talk about the Great Collapse, and like there's just a history to this particular dungeon. What year did Arena come out?
1994.
Okay, so a couple of years after this. Interesting.
Yeah, a couple of years after this. It's interesting. I don't know that I've ever played Arena, but it's something we might.
Well, you start in a dungeon that you've been
right. You always start as a prisoner, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's like
in Elder Scrolls games, but
I can't imagine this game wasn't a big influence, though.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Definitely. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm sure it was. No, so yeah. I mean, I think the big thing was there was a lot of me fiddling around with systems. There was a fair amount of recovering my steps and like looking at the map and trying to figure out, okay, was that an area that I haven't gone to, and then trying to find my way back there. And I ended up just spending a lot of time doing things like that. And one of the things I wondered about was whether, so there's no one thing that's notably absent from this game as a RPG is there is no quest log.
Yeah,
and no quest journal or any journaling of any kind. So anything like that you want, you have to do for yourself. And so I started to wonder if some of the dialogue stuff that would come up was actually hints of things that you could do. And I haven't explored any of that. I'm going to do that in my next session. I'll just try it, and if nothing happens, I'll just restore my save or something like that. I did restore save at places fairly frequently before I had to make a jump, especially. I'd just save and be like, okay, well, since restores are basically instantaneous on modern hardware, I will just not deal with having to run back up and try to find my way. But one of the things is that the head of the Green Goblins, who I loved because you had to totally BS him in a major way. You just had to use all this flowery language and about how great he was and all this stuff in order to get information out of him. But one of the things he says is it would be great, or one of these days I'm going to poison the head of the Grey Goblins. And the Grey Goblins also say something about this big spider that they'd like you to kill. And I haven't gone back to them to try to discuss that or reap any rewards from that, or to try to poison the Grey Goblin King. Because I'm curious, because I think I have a potion of poison. I'm curious if I can use it in that way.
Yeah, no, I think you should investigate. I don't remember. It's been a long, long time, but I think you should investigate.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Stuff.
I don't necessarily want that.
We want to see if it's possible.
I want to know if it supports it. Yeah, because there's no quest log. I'm just curious if there's really only the one quest, or if we're going to need to negotiate with people in order to, I don't know, to get passage, or do I need to give you a thing, right? That was never a thing with that sort of thing, at least in the dungeon parts, was never a thing with older Ultimas. Certainly in the main RPGs, though, it becomes more and more of a thing. Like, oh, you have goals that you're trying to keep track of. And for the oldest ones, of course, you're doing that in a notebook. There's no real journal. But I think, I'm not even going to, I don't even remember now because it's so long ago that I played an Ultima 7 or 6. Like, how much of that is supported by the game and how much of that is just, I wrote stuff down. I don't remember. It's
just so, like, there's an element, and that's sort of that anxiety I was talking about earlier. There's an element of just being undirected, that is exhilarating because again, you're kind of overwhelmed with what the possibilities could be. And it gets crazier as you go deeper, of course, into the dungeons, at each level. But it's also just this anxiety again, of just like, it's when you have, it's sort of, I don't know, it's maybe a feast or famine kind of thing because, again, having been a big, huge fan of Eye of the Beholder 1 and 2, and then kind of going to this one roughly, I'll have to look up the dates of those. And then kind of see, it was just such a leap forward, you know what I mean? And you're like, like with Eye of the Beholder, I kind of know my rule set and I know my limitations and I kind of can really game the system, so to speak. And here it's like, the rules are just kind of flipped on their head. And what, to your point, like even the concept that you're thinking about, can I poison that goblin? Were they giving me a hint of something that I could do, and does it have repercussions? Right. Is amazing, because you wouldn't, in an Eye of the Beholder game, it would be either they would be explicit and tell you what your possibilities were, or you just couldn't do it. There's the food stuff in here. There's light. I wanted to mention the lighting system, right? It was sort of like
lighting,
candles and torches, and then they wear out, and then there's draw distance, and
you got to remember to put them out before you fall asleep.
I forgot about that
burn
too.
Out while you're, which is the thing I keep forgetting. Anyway, for point of information, Eye of the Beholder 1 was in 90, 2 was in 91. 3 was in 93, so they're right around this.
Played 3. Interesting. Yeah, so this was a major leap forward for around the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say that's really why SSI kind of faded away after this.
No, they didn't.
And we're not here to talk about SSI, but when other RPGs are pushing so far forward, it's really hard to just stick to your guns and do the same old thing. It didn't. It didn't. I don't. I mean, I know SSI was around for a little bit longer, certainly, and I don't know.
But it did. Yeah, it started.
Away, but they were definitely fading. They were fading. I would say Eye of the Beholder 2 is probably the end of their heyday, and after that's kind of a long tail of decline. Because they weren't really innovating, and this does so many innovations. It must have been daunting to people in the RPG space to think, "Oh man, this is what
push it forward.
An RPG is now."
Yeah, totally.
Or is this a new type of RPG? Or
and again, Elder Scrolls coming from that, and others, and then in direct lineage, not necessarily an RPG, but we'll talk about it someday because we'll likely play it. And maybe even, I don't know, who knows, maybe based on some of the code in here, Thief, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Came from, and a lot of the same people worked on Thief. And so you can see, like, playing this game and thinking about Thief, you could see the direct connection there. Even with the way that things move, and the way that the combat is and stuff. So, Yeah. So shall we take a quick break and we have some emails, right?
We do
from last time.
So sounds good.
Okay.
Welcome back from the break. We have one review and some emails. We will see how long the emails take us, but I want to throw out the first review. This is from Kupo1256. I'm pretty sure that's a real name. Subject is great podcast.
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Kupo? This is my favorite podcast. Listening to Brett and Tim really makes me want to pick some of these older games up. This podcast is great if you're playing along or just want some insight into the development of these games that helped shape modern gaming. I especially like the interviews with devs. Psst, so do we. When they discuss what design aspects they think they could use in their careers and how they think all of the systems work together or against each other. Keep it up. So thank you, Kupo1256 or 1256 or 1256 or 1256. It's not really clear, but we appreciate it. Thank you very much. We like to have those reviews over at Apple Podcasts. They're a huge help to reach new listeners, or so we're told. I believe it. Everybody, all the podcasts I listen to say that, so it must be true. It's probably on Wikipedia somewhere. You, sir, have the first email. This was sent into devgameclub@gmail.com.
These are some of the ones we missed from last time, right?
That's right. There are 3 from last time that we didn't get to, and then one additional, which we'll see if we have time for, because these are all on the long side.
Okay. So this is, I guess the title is Forest v. Trees.
Correct.
I wonder if that's a V reference. Interesting. From Christian Schuster. Schuster, yes. Hey guys, love the podcast. It's enjoyable to listen to discussions about older games that the commenters are actively playing. Often these discussions tend to be more of our memories of the game and how we feel its impact long after having played it. Tying this concept back to MGS, this is the first chance I've had to play along with the show, and it really hit home how different the experience of playing Metal Gear Solid is from how I remember Metal Gear Solid. I'm a huge fan of the series, but haven't played this game since it came out on the PlayStation. My experience kept bouncing between, oh yeah, that's this ridiculous or incredible moment, and this entire section is terrible to play. Yeah, I can't argue, Christian. I think since the series improved on a lot of these ideas, especially gameplay-wise, as it went on, it tends to color your memories of older games or older entries. Here are some things that I either misremembered or forgot. Can't wait. For a stealth game and a Metal Gear game, there really isn't a lot of sneaking. Yeah. After Psycho Mantis, there really aren't many guards to sneak past since you are either in a scripted battle or a boss encounter. This is hilarious. 2, the combat is generally not fun to play. Dangerous because of how Snake moves and aims. Sorry, this is just cracking me up. The overhead camera doesn't seem to have been accounted for either in many of the level designs. You have to be very close to enemies to get them on screen. This isn't a problem for sneaking since you have the radar, but later areas are jammed. This means the only way to see the guard is to use the first-person view, but then you can't move or aim your weapon. Then we go back to the third person and lose where they are. 3, bosses are on the back end tend to exacerbate the combat problem by requiring too many hits to beat, and the windows for the attack opportunities being very tight. This may feel like I'm saying that in retrospect I didn't like the game, but that wasn't my takeaway. I think as time goes by, what you remember about Metal Gear Solid are all of those crazy plot points, fascinating, outrageous characters, and big messages. The parts where the game isn't fun fade from memory because they aren't the memorable parts of the game. So even after almost throwing the controller at the wall on multiple occasions, I felt like it was still an amazing experience taken as a whole. Keep up the good work on the podcast. Thank you so much, Christian.
Yeah, thank you,
You got to bring a little reality to my obsession. I can't argue with any of that stuff. I mean, in fact...
No, and some of this stuff is things that we brought up. I mentioned with the Hind battle... And also, I think I may have mentioned it with Metal Gear itself about how, okay, I figured out what to do. Now I've got to do it 12 times or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's good.
And how that feels. You know,
I mean,
a little much.
I think many of the games we play, definitely from a modern gaming perspective don't hold up,
Right.
I think of even, like Soul Reaver is an example I'd bring up, right, where we definitely was a good discussion and I'm glad we played it, but there's a lot of things have just progressed so far and
right,
Ultima Underworld as well. But this game, I think he's totally spot on that this franchise, for whatever reason, has really... There are so many things that become memorable for people because of its craziness. So the hindsight's just very different, because you don't focus on the gameplay as much because there's the surrounding trappings of it is just insane, and I think that's what I gravitate to as well. I think.
I would agree. I mean, and I also think the highs are very high. And a lot of those highs are narrative craziness as well, but also just the opening section, which is most of the sneaking in the game, is very memorable. And really, really well done, and not something you had ever seen before. So that just is a huge impression that is left behind. And it also, when you play it fresh, and this is true of any game, a really, really good moment does a lot of things, and one of the things it does is it colors everything that comes after for quite a while. You have a really, really good moment, and you forgive so much because of how you're still on that kind of that high from that really good moment that you really, really enjoyed, that section that really left you feeling great, or like you'd seen something you hadn't seen before.
That's a good point.
And the other thing too is that you establish stuff. If you establish things early on, often people deceive themselves later on about what they're seeing. So the example that I like to use for things like this is in Fallout 3, the first enemy you fight is a rad roach. That rad roach was a ridiculous amount of polys for what it was. So it was a thing where... Yeah, Todd had gone to Jonah Lobe, who was the artist who made it, and he was new to Bethesda at the time. And it was something like 16,000 polys, and Todd's like, cut it in half. And Jonah's like, I can't, it's impossible, no way. And anyway, so he cuts it down to like 10,000 or whatever. And I guess at that point they started figuring out what the actual flow of the introduction was going to be, and at that point Todd said, you know what, leave it, it's fine now, because it's going to be the first thing you see, and everybody's going to think everything is that detailed. Right, because these initial impressions color so much. You see something like the opening cutscene in Silent Hill 2, and now that's what I think of James as. Even though he's never that level of detail again, really. I mean, other than in the
CGI cutscenes in general of that era, right? Their role, their job, even for games we worked on, was to paint. Like the Starfighter game's a perfect example, right? It's a flying ship game. You never see the characters otherwise, right? So you have to have these presentations to kind of give you a false impression of fidelity, I guess, or what have you. But Final Fantasy VII feels like is another really good kind of historical example. The thing,
and they did a lot better there with the in-engine with the cutscenes rather. The characters too, I think, are really well designed for the art style they go for. But not to revisit that game we played 2 years ago or whatever.
The thing that I love about this series that I think Christian's kind of speaking to as well up top is You definitely see this in many other series as well that we've probably talked about and we'll talk about in the future. And we probably will never get through. I can't think that we will be still doing this podcast long enough to do all of the Metal Gear games. But of any series, to see the evolution real time as they are progressing through the series and the different, it's kind of a little bit of a map, kind of a historical map of game development and innovation as it went, because they were stealing things from different other games as the industry was progressing, et cetera, and just kind of the evolution of things over many, many games, and where they end up with 5 or V by the end is astounding. It plays amazingly well, right? And you play this first game and you're like, you cannot imagine how they got there. But if you play each one by one, you see slowly where they added this and then they added this. And then not even that, but they'll do a reissue of a game like 2 and 3 where they did Substance and Subsistence, and they changed the camera system because they were innovating within the game and then repackaging it and selling it back to us, So you see them innovating even within one game with 2 different releases. And we were suckers enough to buy both. I was, but...
Well, yeah, I was going to say we.
The collective we.
Royal we there, I think.
Anyway, thanks for the email, Christian.
Yeah, thanks for the email, Christian. I have one entitled Metal Gear from Travis Grasser. It says, "Hi, Tim and Brett. I've been digging on the podcast for about a year now and really enjoy hearing your insights into classic games along with the format itself. I finally decided to play along when you announced that you would be playing Metal Gear Solid, as I had played through it several times back in the PS1 era and was excited to dip back in now, nearly 20 years later. I was pleasantly surprised to find that the game held up well overall, blocky polygons and all. One of the real standouts for me was the quality of the animations and the cutscenes, which look cool even with the low fidelity of the graphics. Voice work also really holds up, especially when compared to some of its contemporaries like Resident Evil and Symphony of the Night. It's no wonder it made such a big splash in the day. I ended up running through MGS in about 5 days and decided to tackle the rest of the 3D Kojima games, as MGS1 is the only one I'd played beyond an hour or two. I've since finished Sons of Liberty, and while I enjoyed it, I think that it is perhaps viewed as art and social commentary rather than a big-budget game. It is perhaps best viewed. Yeah, okay. Big Shell as a playable location doesn't do much for me, and there's too much Jack and Rose drama. The bosses also just don't quite land, especially when compared to the Rogues Gallery of MGS1. I'm now nearing the end of Snake Eater and can see why it has such a great reputation. One thing that I've noticed here is that the game is more systems-focused than the first 2 entries. The camo and cure mechanics, along with the removal of the mini-map and more open map design overall, combine to give a sense of freedom to the game that was missing previously, while also truly rewarding stealth play. I found myself often running and gunning when things went sideways in the first 2 games, as the stealth never seemed that important, but have since reformed to play quietly while also going for minimal kills, even making it past the Sorrow with 0 kills outside of the bosses. At times, I actually found myself feeling like I was playing through mini Hitman sequences, though with far less Rube Goldberg-esque puzzle solving. Anyway, I'd like to thank you guys for taking on MGS for the podcast. This was not only entertained for a few hours of my daily commute, but also renewed my interest in the series as a whole. Peace Walker 4 and Ground Zeroes / Phantom Pain are all on deck for me to play in the near future. Keep up the great work on the podcast and your game projects. Tim, I loved Tomb Raider 2013 and Rise. Definitely highlights of the past 5 years for me. Cheers, Travis G. And P.S. Better toss a quarter into the Jason and Kirk kickback bucket, as I'm another Kotaku referral.
Nice.
So yes, that we will. I will send them a quarter each. Why not? I'm a big spender.
I appreciate the games most when I play stealth as well. I generally play low lethality in the Metal Gear games whenever I can. So, and 3 definitely leans in.
I was actually wondering what your rating was this time out.
I don't remember,
because we didn't talk about.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel I might have put it in my notes. It was something.
That's fine. You don't have to dig it out. I got Puma.
No, I was not a Puma. It was like a
It's a whole thing we didn't actually discuss.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's such a trope for the whole series. I feel like I was like a hippopotamus or something. I don't think it was that, but it was not a puma. I forgot about that. That's a good one. We'll have to look at that later.
Anyway, yeah, you should check that out. Let people know. I'll put it in the Twitter or something if you shoot me an email.
Yeah, look at the
Yeah, no, I played the first three fairly close together because I had them all, and I think I played them right after I left Bethesda. I think that's when I started, or maybe started one while I was playing Bethesda, and finished 2 and 3 not too long after. Yeah, I mean, playing them one after the other like that, I think reinforces, like, it makes you want to go back and rethink how you played the other ones, and like it's a whole huge stew that is really fun to dive into. To mix a metaphor. And I do, having played one, if it were not for my crippled hand here, I have basically Revolver Ocelot hand right now. If not for that, I think I would have continued playing. Going back to 4, which I was kind of in the middle of. As of last year, so at some point I will. Hopefully, I will be on the mend.
For those who haven't, and they're hard to completely recommend, but if you're a fan and you haven't played the PSP games, they are legitimate Kojima games. For those who didn't know, the Portable Ops and Peace Walker. And Peace Walker actually is a direct prequel to 5/V. So if you really want the full experience and you want to see kind of where some of the 5 characters came from and stuff like that, and follow from 3, which is of course Big Boss, not Solid Snake, follow Big Boss's career, you should definitely play Peace Walker and Portable Ops if you have the time. Anyway, shall I have the next one?
All right. Yeah, you have the next one. This one's, I think, the shortest one we got this time, so go ahead.
Okay. From Michael? Oh, yeah. Okay. Hey, guys. Just finished listening to the first episode of Metal Gear Solid and wanted to thank you guys for noting the sexism in Kojima games. I've got a lucky scenario where my wife is happy enough to watch what I play. However, I've lost count of how many times I've had to justify some games when they present a totally unnecessary sexualized Quiet from MGS or Cindy from FF15 as examples. Most of the time I realize it could be cultural influences, but do you guys have to argue against this in your roles nowadays? Cheers, Michael.
Quiet and Cindy are both tough examples to argue against. They are pretty over the top. I have not played V, but I did play a lot of Final Fantasy 15. And Cindy is a little bit over the top. At first I thought she was Sid, but Sid is actually in there as well. So anyway, that...
Oh, that's right. I was trying to think of who she was. I mean, obviously I haven't played, but
she's the mechanic.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
I haven't seen any images, but yeah, I mean, as far as like your question about nowadays, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in fact, it was just a clarification for the previous emailer. I did not work on Rise of the Tomb Raider myself. I was only on the reboot. And anyway, it was obviously a really important hot topic for the Tomb Raider reboot, because we had to look at the character differently, and there were a lot of weird, uncomfortable conversations about, what to do with that character because of the legacy of how poorly she was handled in the past, to be honest. Right. And we had to make calls on how we were going to deal with that. From the visualization of her, and how we were going to modernize that and make her more realistic and grounded, and as well as a writing and characterization, which ultimately, the team was the ones to finally execute on that. And I think they did a great job with that. And then, it's a little bit different on Halo, but we definitely have had conversations about Cortana and how she's been handled and trying to improve upon that. Giving her clothes, for instance, and and actually how we portray Spartans as well, making sure that the Spartan program was appropriate for the futuristic time frame that it was taking place on, where of course everybody could be a Spartan, you know what I mean, equally. So it definitely is something that comes up, and that's why I was always bummed about it with the way that it was in MGS, because it's one of my favorite series, and V was even worse because it was the most recent one, and still, and I would even say that the way that, and this is going to maybe be shocking, but I would even say the way that Quiet was handled isn't even the worst part of how there's another character that is handled in Ground Zeroes that's from Peace Walker that I think is handled even worse. So I just don't get it. Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, I think I was pretty lucky at Bethesda in that our lead character artist, Christiana, and I'm forgetting Christiana's last name, her and her husband both work there. It'll probably come to me, and maybe not in time to speak it. But anyway, is the lead character artist is a woman, and I think that helps a lot. You play Skyrim, and I'm sure there are some outfits that are more sexualized than others, but they're very rare, and it's not in your face all the time. I do think there's like one maybe vampire outfit that's pretty racy, but considering the amount of clothing that are in those games, it's actually kind of surprising that it's not more visible. It's not more of an issue, and I think that all comes down to oh no, it's not Mike, it's Steve, it's Meister, Christianne Meister. Sorry, it all just came rushing back. Mike threw me off. It's not Mike, it's Steve. Anyway, they're long time folks who've been there forever, and been part of the company for a long time, and been part of its vision. And I think that has meant those games tend to be less sexualized, and that's one of the many things to value in having a diverse staff, is that blind spots that you might otherwise have, you get to avoid, because you have somebody there saying, "Oh, hey, what if a girl plays this game?" I think that's why it's really good to seek that out, especially teams of a certain size, and to be vocal about these things when they come up. I know that the quest design staff was more male, and there had to be people who were really watching out for the messages that individual quests might be sending forward. So it's stuff to keep in mind. I think we have time for this last one. It is also quite long. Thanks, Michael, for your email. This is from Jeff. Oh man, Bataccio, I'm going to say. Its subject is Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes Rebuttal. I am a fan of the show and have been a weekly listener for almost a year. Upon finishing listening your first episode on Metal Gear Solid, I was once again spurred to action and decided to join y'all on this particular trip of nostalgia. But what version to play? Even though I have a copy of the PSX version, this playthrough presented an opportunity to add to my game collection. I did a quick scan of Wikipedia and discovered the GameCube version of Metal Gear Solid, remade on the MGS2 engine, which is an interesting note. A few clicks to eBay, and a few days later, I was playing along. I finished over the weekend, and while listening to your final episode on MGS, I was stopped dead when I heard the feedback on the Twin Snakes version, specifically the concern raised that the first-person mode and tranquilizer darts may ruin the classic MGS experience. I've not played the original MGS in about 10 years, and while I had known that the first-person mode was added to the Twin Snakes version, I was completely oblivious that the tranq darts were not in the original. In short, I thought I was playing a game that was closer to the original than it is. Perhaps I played an easier and prettier version of MGS, but that assessment does not detract from a thoroughly enjoyable experience. An experience that was likely smoothed out by the Twin Snakes additions. As an adult gamer who has far less time than I had 10 years ago, and likely less controller skill, I think Twin Snakes hit the sweet spot for me by providing an enjoyable playing experience with minimal frustration. So I am standing firm, and possibly alone, in my support of Twin Snakes. Keep up the great work, Jeff B.
Oh, good rebuttal, though. I definitely want to play it. Yeah. And I'm sure because they were trying to make it more usable in general, and probably there was some balance tuning stuff, because we did comment on how kind of imbalanced the original was at times.
Yeah. Out of whack.
So maybe that's another good reason to play that one too, because you would hope that, Miyamoto getting in there might, have some good suggestions on balance.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize it was built on the MGS2 engine, and that makes
I didn't know that
makes
either.
A lot more sense. So we did absolutely no research into that. We don't do tons. So, a little production note there for you.
Surprise! We're seat of the pantsing it sometime.
So yeah, it makes total sense, and it also makes. You also, I think, for people who have the PS2, have bought a PS2, it's like, well, if I want to play this earlier game, there's the PS1 game now out on the GameCube, and maybe that moves some GameCube hardware, and making that closer to that also makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of reasons why that would be a good decision. Also, just in terms of polygon rendering and stuff, you'd want a more up-to-date engine. So if you get along some improvements or changes to the gameplay, that's going to happen. It probably smooths it out. No argument. I think I think you do miss out on some great moments, but that might be well paid off for in having kind of a less janky experience. So no reason not to enjoy it. And certainly
play both.
Yeah. Play both. Yeah, great. Play both. He says to the person who is like, I'll play the game that's a little shorter and easier.
Yeah.
Just play both. That's what you want, Jeff. Oh, boy. Don't listen to him. Do what you want, Jeff. We applaud you. Thanks for the email. Okay. I think that's about it. We do need to talk about next time. I was thinking the next 2 levels.
Yeah, I was thinking up to... you mean through 3?
Yes, through 3.
Yeah, that's probably good, because I have some catch up to do, but I feel like, I think there's 8 levels total.
There are 8 levels total, and I figured what we'll do is do 2 and 3 this time, and then try to do 3 for the next time, since you're catching up this time, and then finish with a couple at the end. So it'll probably be 2 and 3 this time, and then 4 through 6, and then 7 and 8, and whatever end game there is, because I actually have no idea. And Tim has a better idea. He's probably thinking, it's going to be good.
Man, my memory on it's,
You have no idea. That's good.
I remember lava, maybe.
Oh, good. Exodus? Is Exodus there?
I don't remember that.
No, Exodus is
I don't remember who Exodus
is the Ultima 3 final boss.
Yeah, I played 3. Yeah, that was the name of the game too, but I don't remember.
The computer
Exodus,
I believe.
Oh, yeah, that's right. This franchise.
It's weird.
I totally forgot about the whole Avatar thing where you're from our world. I don't think they didn't have that. They weren't leaning into that in this version though, right? They didn't have like you're sitting in your desk.
No, it's more like here you've just finished the adventure and you're still there. This is like an epilogue to the Narnia book, It's like, I haven't gone back to the wardrobe yet.
They kick you into the dungeon.
And they throw you into the dungeon because Almric's daughter is, I think that's his name, has been kidnapped, and you don't get to go home yet. Actually, that was the other thing, and maybe we'll talk about more. Just touch on it now, I guess, is that Ultima Underworld 2, it seems like it ties to different worlds, so it's like expanding this whole thing that they're kind of doing with Ultima at this time, which is not a part of Ultima 1, but I think it goes other places, other worlds. There's a whole theoretical discussion, in 2 about about what might happen. And it's called Labyrinth of Worlds, so that's kind of a big hint.
I don't think I ever finished 2, to be honest. I think I did start it.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a bit bigger, so I don't know that I'll finish it either. But anyway, that's it for us this week. You can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Of course, the podcast is at Dev Game Club. You can find us also on the web at devgameclub.com. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts through their poll thing, or shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com, as I mentioned earlier. Thanks so much for listening, and have fun playing this week. Good night.
Good night.